Welcome to COASTER-net Uncut.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of COASTER-net Uncut. I am Andrew Barchak from Chicago, Illinois, joined once again by my illustrious co-host, Mr. Danny Miller from, you're somewhere new, Danny. Where are you at today?
Well, I'm back at my parents' house for the weekend. I'm visiting my parents and my sister. My sister's on spring break this past week, so visiting them here at my original home right outside of Allentown, Pennsylvania. Getting ready for Dollywood next week. It's going to be a fun time on opening weekend, and we're going to ride a really nice Aero roller coaster. As a little segue here, we've got a couple of guests with us here this afternoon. Andy, who do we have joining us this fine afternoon?
This fine afternoon, we have some of the producers and the masterminds behind one of the most hotly anticipated documentaries this year in the roller coaster community. We have Kris Robert and Robert Engel here, who are both integral parts of the legacy of Aero development. This wonderful documentary that was supported a lot by the coaster enthusiasts, by specifically American coaster enthusiasts, and really traces the entire story of the Aero company from start to finish. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming on here this afternoon to COASTER-net Uncut. Can you maybe introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about yourselves and what you're all about? Kris, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So my name is Kris Robert. I am the writer and producer on the Legacy of Aero Development documentary. I am a radio personality here in the Bay Area, hence the radio moniker stuff behind there. And in addition to that work, huge ACE member, love ACE and everything that they do, and really appreciate that they were able to work with us to bring this documentary to all of you.
And Robert?
All right. Yeah, so I'm Robert Engel, as told earlier, and I was the associate producer and the social media photographer for the Legacy of Aero project.
Okay, awesome. Now, we're here to talk to you guys about this documentary today, and my first question was how did you get the idea of wanting to do an Aero documentary? How did that develop? Where did this idea come from to start with?
Well, it all started with a TV show that we do called Lost Parts of Northern California out here in the Bay Area. And we had always thought that, why don't we do an Aero special someday? Let's do a 30-minute special. We thought that'd be a cool thing to do. Well, after doing all the research, we realized, 30 minutes is not long enough to even tell the story of Aero, let alone tell it in a good way. So what we decided to do after that is, let's expand it a little bit and see how much we would need. And we finally just ended up on saying, let's just do a whole documentary on Aero. Nobody's ever done it before. We love the history of the company, so let's do it. And we approached ACE with the idea, and it was a unanimous vote to help fund the program, and we've just taken off from there.
That's a really cool story because ACE has this storied history of one of the biggest points I think in the documentary is this idea that every park has an Aero and every park needs an Aero, and many times many parks have more than a few Aeros. So this is really one of those stories, I think, whether you've been at Disneyland or Cedar Point or any of the Six Flags parks in the chain, that this is the story that can really appeal to anyone that's ever been to any park, because at some point you've probably ridden an Aero ride at one point or another. Danny, I know you're a big fan of Aero. What you had a few questions here. What did you want to say?
Yeah. So I've always been the type of person who, a lot of the Aero coasters as they get older, some people maybe not always a huge fan of them, but I've always been a big fan of the Aero coasters, especially when Andy, you and I were talking about how with the new Top 5 series, you come across all these great Aero coasters like Loch Ness Monster, Magnum XL 200, even Desperado is one that you and I really like. Tennessee Tornado, we're coming up on that one next weekend. even defunct ones like the Big Bad Wolf that are no longer around. And there is just so much history. And especially, being out in the West Coast there, that's really where Arrow got started. I mean, not only were they located out there, but when you go through the history and everything they did with Disney, and then eventually they got to the Matterhorn, and then, the first looping coaster was there in the western part of the States. So what was it like being, out in the West Coast area, just having so much of that knowledge and knowing that so much of the beginning of Arrow took place out there right up until the very end with X2 really kind of the story is bookended on the West Coast. What is it like kind of being a local out there and having seen so much of that and then being able to tell the story?
Well, I think part of the cool factor, if you will, of the film is that it's not just a story about local history, because that's what it is for us here in the Bay Area. It's a story of international history. I mean, Arrow changed the game forever.
Sure.
And companies to this day are following their model because it works so well. I will say this, though, to be able to say that, yes, I am from the same area as Arrow Development. I can go to the site where the corkscrew used to stand and say, yes, I know what used to be here. That's pretty incredible.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Now, how much involvement did the parks have in this? Because, throughout the documentary, we have a number of spokespeople in there. But how much were the parks important in you being able to put this documentary together?
Oh, it would not be possible without the parks helping us out. And like you said, there's a lot of spokespeople in there in the film, but that is just a small portion of the amount of work that they had to do to make this documentary happen. Well, there was just so much behind the scenes work to make sure we had our permits correct, to make sure that we had the film dates correct, to make sure that we had notifications that we'd be filming on certain rides. It was insane. I could show you the file. It's just about that thick of paperwork to get the film done. And I can tell you this, though, not just the parks that would help us out, but the people along the way that helped us out. For instance, I know Robert's got a wonderful story about Henny Henninger, who used to own Kennywood. And we can't even tell you some of the good stuff that he told us off camera. But still, for him to be able to come out there and talk to us at a park that he no longer has any vested interest in, that sort of tells you the passion in the industry that's still there.
Now, Robert, so why don't you, I was going to ask you, what are your most memorable parts of being a part of this documentary process?
Oh, man. Just, is everything an answer? I don't know. Just being able to travel to all these places and, getting to literally ride pieces of history is truly incredible,
How, and I don't know if you have an exact number, but overall, how many parks did you guys actually visit to piece this together? I know there's probably about seven to eight probably in the film, and I'm sure you guys went to more than that.
It was 10 total. I think 10 parks we went to in total. Yeah. And then we also got contributions from a lot of people who were just at other parks that we weren't able to make it to. For example, we did not go to Blackpool Pleasure Beach as much as we wanted to. It was not in the budget. But it just so happened that Ace's European trip was happening then, so we were able to coordinate with them and get the footage for that.
Yeah, because and I think that was one of the coolest parts of this was the vast amount of footage that you guys had, especially some of the historical footage, some of the stuff from Disney. It was stuff that I had never seen before. The one video of like the steeplechase, just classic rides, and I think the most impressive video footage had to be the footage from the Arrow factory with all the prototypes. Where
absolutely
that's stuff that I have never seen before. How in the world did you guys? Where was that hidden? Like, what was that like? How did you guys get that?
You want to take that one? Oh, by the way, we should make it clarify that Robert is about 10 feet away from me that way. So when I look this way, I'm usually in the same room, but just so it doesn't look strange to anybody watching.
It's
Magic of the movies.
All that came from Dana Morgan, if not mistaken, correct?
Okay.
Was all yeah. So yeah, it came in his archives. Who is Ed Morgan's son, later went on to make Morgan Manufacturing. He had all this incredible aero photos in just his personal archives, and he allowed us to use everything pretty much that we wanted. So it was pretty incredible to have like some of that footage and photos. And I think we have one of the only photos of Walt Disney on the Pirates of the Caribbean prototype flume, which is very cool.
And then in addition to the footage that Dana was able to provide for us, which, by the way, we have the 10 photos of the first corkscrew test run, we held those in our hands. That was insane. But we also had Nancy Bacon Franks, who was Carl Bacon's daughter, reach out to us and say, I've got an entire room full of aero material. Would you like to go through it? And we just sort of said, what?
That's great.
Yeah.
And then in addition to all of that, we got a lot of our material from a Dexter Francis, who is a big aero proponent online. If you find the Aero Development Facebook group, you'll see him all over the place talking about how cool aero was. But he was also a huge part of making sure that the film was able to get all that cool footage and photos especially.
And I know, Danny, me and you were talking, ahead of time, and we just said that was one of the real hallmarks, I think, that the real things of this video was the classic video. That, it would have been easy to go to, like, Busch Gardens, Williamsburg, and shoot Loch Ness now, but you had the video of it when it was actually, the interlocking loops and both trains going through at almost the same time.
Yeah.
Like, it's that stuff that people, if you go to the park today, you'll never be able to see that right now because of the way that they run the ride. But I thought that was really the amazing part of this documentary is all of the classic footage. And even more so than that, the stories that went along with that footage. The story about the prototype bobsled, where the two marketing department ladies got stuck on it. I was laughing after that story.
Yeah, that was a good one. So kind of transitioning from that, you guys were able to show us so much footage and just so much information that I think a lot of people don't know about. I know a buddy of mine that I went to college with who's also a coaster enthusiast, when he watched the documentary for the first time, he was messaging me and saying, I had no idea Aero did so much at Disney. I had no idea they had such an involvement with this. So this could be a question for both of you. So maybe Robert, you can give your answer first. What was something that you guys either didn't know about or you found out more about that was the most interesting thing that you kind of learned about through this whole process?
Well, one of my favorite little tidbit facts is that when they were building Loch Ness Monster at Busch Gardens, so they're getting ready to install the last piece of track. It was 6 feet in the wrong direction.
I love the story.
Yeah, so it was dead of winter, literally winter. No way to fix it, so they brought out blow torches, heated up the track, and just hit it the other way with a hammer. And hey, it worked. They got the job done. So that was always one of my favorite stories.
That's one of my favorite stories to hear. If you take, depending on your guide, if you take the behind-the-scenes coaster tour at Busch Gardens now, our guide told us that story, and I remember thinking back to Devin Olson's Fury documentary. The construction guy, Ronnie Mosley, said they had an 1/8 of an inch gap, which is like the perfect gap to have between when the last piece of track goes in, and it can't be a whole lot bigger than that. Otherwise, you have to. So I know Griffin, when they built Griffin, they had problems with, like, the track was off by almost 1/2 an inch, and they had to take apart the second Immelman loop because it wasn't lining up properly, and that was like, it was 1/2 an inch, and this ride was off 6 feet, and they just were able to fix it. So what about you, Chris?
Oh, the most unique thing, I would probably say, and I think Nicholas and Kim, who unfortunately weren't able to join us today, their favorite story is usually the fact that Walt Disney was an acrophobiac. And nobody actually knew that before we released this film. And the Disney people probably don't appreciate us doing that, but doesn't matter, it's fact. So Walt Disney, for those of you who have not seen the film, came out to Mountain View on many occasions to check out Arrow's latest creation and see, okay, well, let's see what it could do. So he's pressed for time. He has to build It's a Small World for Pepsi for the World's Fair. And he comes out to the track, and you can see the sort of test track out there. Well, they had some scaffolding over that, and you had to kind of go over it to get to the other side of the track. Well, Walt wasn't really a big fan of that, to the point that Carl Bacon had to grab his hand and hold Walt Disney's hand about 3 feet above this rushing water to get over the scaffolding. And to me, that's just, you think Walt Disney is this very big, powerful, like the icon of amusement parks. And he's afraid of heights.
Sure.
The other story.
Well,
you can go, Danny.
The other thing that goes along with that is like Ron Tumor.
Yeah.
Hang on. I may have made a mistake, which is not uncommon for me.
Yeah. Walt Disney wasn't holding Carl Bacon's hand, I believe. I believe it was actually Ed Morgan.
Was Ed Morgan?
It was Ed Morgan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, someone had to hold his hand, right?
Somebody was holding his hand from Arrow, yes.
Yeah.
That's well, and that kind of brings up the interesting point is, it's. Ron Toomer, I think, is the big name that everybody knows from Arrow. If there was one person that a coaster enthusiast knows from Arrow, I think it was Ron Toomer, because he came in kind of later, and, with him passing away just a few years ago, that was, big in the coaster community. And a lot of people aren't aware that he got motion sick very easily and didn't ride rides too. Like that, I think that's funny how there's kind of that connection between the two of them.
Well, and it should be noted, though, that a lot of people said that Ron never rode any of his own rides. That's not true. We spoke with his family in Texas, which happened to live just a few miles away from Six Flags over Texas, conveniently. And they had told us that, he actually did ride the rides, but he only ride them like once. And usually did it when nobody was looking, so that nobody could see it. But he still rode them, so he could at least enjoy them. Did he ride it multiple times in an ERT? No, he didn't. But he did at least once.
No.
Well, you're saying he didn't ride Gemini over 100 times in one day, like this guy did?
No.
Yeah, it takes a real special person to do that, and only coaster enthusiasts.
Special.
Exactly. And count me among the people that really did not realize the effect that Arrow had on Disneyland. I was blown away, and maybe I shouldn't have been. Maybe I should be a little bit more knowledgeable. But I was just blown away at the number of rides that they had their hands in, from Pirates to Small World to the Dumbo ride, and that story about the hydraulics and the foam and the NASA. That was just classic too. I don't want to give away too many stories. I want people to watch the documentary.
Please watch the documentary.
There are just so many great stories in here. But I think at this point, I neglected to ask this at first, but what are each of your favorite Arrow rides? Because I want to know.
You had to go there, huh?
I had to go there, yes.
It's such a hard question, because I have two favorites. I can't pick one. So mine would have to be Phantom's Revenge and Loch Ness Monster. Those are my two.
And I'm going to have to go with Magnum XL 200 with right behind it, the Six Flags Mine Train at Over, Texas.
Okay.
Yes. That is a wonderful mine train. Certainly, I think, and I'll admit to this. I knew that it was like the original mine train, and it was a big deal when they built that. It was one of the very first tubular steel roller coasters, after the Matterhorn. But I didn't realize how wonderful the theme was on all of that. And I won't spoil it for people who haven't been there. But it's like you don't see pictures of that. You don't see a whole lot of. There's even not a lot of videos out there about that ride, which surprises me. But when I rode that ride for the first time a few years ago, I was taken back by how great the theming was and just how much fun that ride was. And, when we went down there, my aunt went down there for the first time a few years ago, she was surprised by it too. It's just amazing to see, these rides that are 50 plus years old now, or getting close to it anyways, really standing through the test of time and are still, there's still some really nice rides out there. Magnum is certainly one of them. I mean, that's always been a fan favorite for sure.
Especially when we found out where we're supposed to sit for the airtime. I didn't know that the last time I was at that park in 2008. Oh. Now that we have all the engineers there telling us, no, you need to sit in this specific row or this specific row. Well, that's just a little different ride now all of a sudden.
Yeah, it's
yes, it is.
I remember doing a few events at Cedar Point. I'm a Cedar Point fanboy, self-professed. But
that's the first step in admission.
Absolutely. And everyone always says when you're doing like a little marathon on Magnum, it's row 3. You have to sit row 3 for only a few times because you're not going to survive the whole hour if you continually sit in row 3.
No,
it's not going to happen. And really, that's one.
It's the only row I ever sit in.
That's one of the things that bothers me kind of about the industry today is whenever there's talk of people taking out rides and to put in for future expansion, it seems like right now the aero coasters are the one on the losing side. I'm involved in a lot of Cedar Point discussions, and there's always talk of taking out, Cedar Creek Mine Ride or Iron Dragon. And I'm like, no, these rides are classic rides. You need these rides. You still need the aero rides in the park. Granted, you still have Gemini. I've even heard people talk about removing Gemini. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Yeah, it's just craziness. And it's to the point where, but we do see it happen a lot. We saw it happen at Busch Gardens Williamsburg for certain reasons with Big Bad Wolf, and I was lucky enough to ride Big Bad Wolf, and it's still one of my favorite roller coasters of all time. It's still in my top 40 out of almost 400 rides I've been on, and it provides an experience that I think is unprecedented amongst roller coasters, that classic experience, but more importantly, it gives you the ability to have your kids ride it too. That usually aeros always have a low height requirement, and that can be a kid's first major roller coaster. I can still remember my first time I went to Cedar Point in 1992. I didn't ride Magnum. I was too afraid to ride Magnum. I was definitely afraid to ride Magnum. And I didn't ride it until the next season when we went. And my parents kind of tricked me into it. I was probably like in grammar school, and my parents tricked me into riding it. So, but once I got on it, I loved it. And I think that's one of the special things about aero is this ability to have a connection between families, between parents and kids. Of many people's first roller coasters is the aero.
Well, and kind of going off that height requirement thing, absolutely. In fact, our contact at Busch Gardens had said that it is great to have that 48-inch height requirement because it's everybody's first big coaster. And if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, Robert, I believe X at Magic Mountain has only a 48-inch height requirement on it.
I'm actually not sure about that.
I don't know.
It could be.
Or it could be crazy. So that's sort
it's
of
not 54. I think it's 52 or lower. For sure. It might be 48. I think you might be right there. You could be right.
It would be a shocker if I'm right about something.
That's a good point, and I think a lot of you see that, and a lot of the parks I think in the late 80s, early 90s that got some of these bigger coasters, and even you see rides like Vortex at Kings Island, and when we were in the heat of the Coaster Wars, and then you had Magnum, and then Shockwave at Great America, Great American Scream Machine, Viper at Six Flags Magic Mountain. You had all these giant roller coasters coming in, right in the heart of the Coaster Wars that were setting all these world records. And you could have a lot of people in the family riding them. I know one of the stories that gets told in my household all the time and in my family is my aunt, my mom and her two sisters, my two aunts, and then their father, who has passed on. They went down to Busch Gardens, Williamsburg. They were there the year Loch Ness Monster opened, and they rode it 14 times in a row, and the four of them would get off the ride. My grandfather would look at them and say, "Okay, that was fun. Let's go again." And they did that for hours. And they absolutely love that coaster. So now there's that, like you said, there's that personal connection when I go down and ride that ride. And every time I see that ride, every time I see pictures or video, every time I ride that ride, I think back to how it has a deep history within our family. And because there has been such a deep, rich history of Arrow rides, you have that where it's now spanned different generations.
Absolutely. And one of the cool things about Arrow attractions is just that everybody knows them, but yet they've never really understood the whole story behind them. And that's the hardest part about seeing them have to get torn out, because in many cases, there's only so much spot welding you can do before you either have to just completely replace the track or it's just no longer sound to keep it up. And the maintenance just would not be, it's too prohibitive. That's just the way that steel coasters are. Wooden coasters will last forever if you take care of them. A steel coaster, as one of our experts said, has a finite life, and eventually it's going to go away. It's just a matter of how well do you take care of it and how much stress does it put on its own track before eventually it has to go.
And that's the really sad part, and I think the sadder part is the other part of this story, what was you really chronicled the rise of Arrow, how the impact of Arrow, but then you also chronicled in a very smart way the downfall of Arrow. And that part of the story I thought was extremely interesting too. I've always wondered myself about the Arrow-Vekoma connection, that I've always known that they've had very similar track styles, but to know the extent of that deal and how Arrow kind of shot themselves in the foot by trying to make that deal, that was a really enlightening part of the story. And how did you get some of that information about Vekoma?
So that is all through our contact, our big Arrow fan, who's Dexter Francis. He was able to get us all that material, some of the first-hand accounts, and then also just talking with the people who were involved with Arrow. You've got Dana Morgan, who's in the film, who told us quite a bit about the Vekoma deal, as well as Nancy Bacon Franks, and even the Toomer family. And it's just great to be able to hear, rather great to be able to not hear the story off of Wikipedia and actually hear it from the people who were there, because they're the ones that actually know what the hell they're talking about.
Now, I know, because like the documentary is factually based, but to get your take on it, to get your opinion on it, would you say that the documentary almost paints it as if the Vekoma deal was like the biggest mistake? But was it, would you say that Arrow just lagged behind in design as opposed to because to me, it seems that the whole period of the 1990s, Arrow was a huge company in the 80s, big company in the early 90s, and then it seemed like that upstart company, B&M, just kind of started beating them out at different points. Would you agree with that assessment? That maybe B&M was maybe Arrow's, the cause of Arrow's biggest downfall? Or the ultimate downfall, I should say?
That's where it gets tough. I'll sort of chime in, and then I'll have Robert sort of chime in too. I think that it was a culmination of different things, several different fronts. If it was just one front, it would be a lot easier to battle. But when you're battling a war on multiple fronts, that's when you see companies disappear. So I think that it was just part of a series of events that basically caused the company's demise. It wasn't one singular item. It was just that kept building up and building up and building up until eventually it was an insurmountable mountain.
I think you could almost even say that the industry grew too fast, and they couldn't keep up technological-wise. I mean, because B&M had these fancy computer systems to design their roller coasters, where Arrow hadn't quite caught up with that until they finally got to Tennessee Tornado, where they figured out how to make their rides better, but it was just kind of too late at that point, unfortunately.
And that's a good point, too, that you think of all the companies, that you have Vekoma on the market, you have B&M on the market, Morgan started doing his own thing and made his company, and now you have all this competition. I think you said it right, Robert, that the industry was so profitable, there was so much money to be made that you have all these companies piling into it, and it's hard for one company because that was the other point that I thought was really interesting throughout the whole thing, is that even when Arrow was popular, the return on each ride wasn't all that great. That when they installed huge rides at Disney or huge rides around the country, they weren't making, tons of money. A lot of times they said that, Disney had to bail them out a little bit and said, these people should not be losing money on my attractions, that they're visionaries. They're the ones who are keeping me afloat. And so he then invested in the company.
Right.
At what point, I don't know if this was said in the documentary, at what point did Disney get out of Arrow?
What point did Disney get out of Arrow? That is a wonderful question. You're making me go back to the fact list. Oh, goodness. Oh, dear. What time?
I would probably say shortly after Walt Disney's death.
Okay.
Just because WDI
that would make sense, right?
WDI started growing so much larger, and they just started doing their own thing pretty much.
Yeah,
at that point.
That makes a lot of sense because that seems like that was like a personal. That Disney really believed in these people, and then when he's not there, the company's just going to move forward. So, Danny, what were you going to say?
Well, and how ironic is it that now whenever you see these big coaster-like rides going into Disney parks like Expedition Everest, Rock and Roller Coaster, who's doing them now? Who did the refurbishment of Space Mountain? Vekoma's doing all of that, which I think is a very strange twist of fate how it ends up working that way, isn't it? I mean, and obviously Arrow's not around anymore in the old form to help out, but I think that's just a really strange connection how that all comes together like that.
Absolutely. It's just part of business at the same time, though. It's such a tight-knit industry. Everybody knows everybody. So eventually you're going to work with everybody in the industry if you hang around long enough.
Yeah, for sure.
I think so.
Do you guys think that Arrow, let's assume for a second that Arrow would have been able to push past their financial troubles. Do you think that Arrow would have had enough of the right people to innovate, to stay, to do even more things?
Oof, another personal opinion question.
Yeah.
Really, Robert?
We like those here.
It's really hard to say because I mean it's like trying to predict the future. You just don't know. I mean they had all these other plans for like the what's that called? Name's drawing a blank on me.
Was it the
Fish hook?
No, not the fish hook.
The acrobat maybe?
The wild mouse thing.
Oh,
acrobatic.
Yeah.
Aerobatic.
Aerobatic. Yeah, that was it.
There you go.
I mean, because they had that in development, but none of them were ever built. Of course, S&S later went on to kind of do their own thing with the El Loco. Mm-hmm. But in my opinion, it's just really hard to say if they would have lasted or not.
I kind of.
It's interesting when
I was going to say. Yeah, you can go, Chris. We didn't get your.
Wonders of the internet delay. I was put out a tweet today, just sort of as a sort of food for thought. If it worked for Arrow's pioneering work, RMC might still be making tool sheds. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's that possibility that, well, maybe Alan Schilke, who worked for Arrow and designed X and eventually went on to RMC, maybe he would have figured out that you could go away from tubular steel and go to that flat steel. Mm-hmm. And maybe he would have done that at Arrow.
Very true.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking too. As I listened to Alan Schilke talk, I've always been a huge fan of him. I've seen him at multiple things. And the stuff he's doing with RMC is really innovative, especially this new T-Rex track concept. This single rail idea seems really cool. But I think one of the great travesties of our time is the fact that the X design has not been replicated at other places. I am a huge fan of X. I love X. I rode it as X2. I absolutely love that ride. But I think it's one of the great travesties of our time that ride design hasn't been replicated more in the States. Why do you think people, because like S&S is still building those, are people just afraid of it? Are they afraid of the price tag? Because the $45 million almost knocked me off my seat when I heard that number. I'm like, it's a great ride, but $45 million, that's like Disney money.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, Arrow was all about making rides that were affordable for the most part. Like the Corkscrew prototype was only $700,000, I believe.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That was a reasonable amount for a mid-sized park. A ride like X is not a mid-size attraction, at least in its current form. In its original form, as Alan Schilke wanted to do it, like the S&S 4D Free Fly, that is a better attraction, and it's a much more attractive price point. I think that the price alone is a major part of that, but I also think that a lot of people just don't understand its capability, and it's so unique that it's become so niche.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's just, like you said, a lot of people, I talked to a number of enthusiasts, from the show on YouTube, on our forums at COASTER-net. And X is one of those rides that kind of polarizes some people. Some people say, oh, it's not that impressive. And other people, like myself, are just singing the praises up and down. I love X. And I always tell the story, and I probably told it 3 times this month already, how I first rode X2 in 2011, towards the beginning of when I started going out into the world to experience different parks. That, like I said, I'm a Cedar Point fanboy. Right around 2011, I started going out to different parks to experience new things. And X was at the beginning of that journey. And now I kind of said, oh, well, maybe X isn't that great. And I kept moving it down my rankings. And then just this past September, I was able to go back to Magic Mountain, and I fell in love with that ride all over again. It was like riding it for the first time, and I'm like, why don't people love this?
Goodness. What a ride.
Why don't more parks have this ride? And it just irritates me because I don't get out to California very often. I've been there twice in my life. So, it's kind of like my issue with Fury. Yeah, only twice. I'm now
3 times for me.
I may be going this summer to your area. So I might be hitting up San Francisco and Discovery Kingdom and all those parks this summer. So I'm hoping to experience all the greatness there. But X is just one of those rides, man, that I just wish it would have caught on more. I don't want to go to Japan to have to ride it.
Well, I think it's X and what has now become X2. I first rode it in 2012. I went to California as a kid and went to Knott's Berry Farm and Disney with my family. Did a combined Northern and Southern California park in 2012. In 2014, we did just Northern California, and this past year we did Southern California. And X2 is one of 2 rides that I've ever ridden where I turned to the person at the end of the ride that was next to me and said, what the hell just happened? And that's the impression you get when you... And not only did I say that the first time I rode it, my dog is going a little nuts over here. I guess my dog must like X2 as well, I guess. Doesn't quite meet the height requirement, but anyway, I said that when I rode it for the first time in 2012 when it was my dad sitting next to me. And in 2015, it was my aunt sitting next to me, and it was her first time riding, and both of them had the same exact reaction. And it's one of those incredible rides that it just sticks out in your mind because it is so unique. And for me, when you ride a ride like that, and then you ride a ride like Tennessee Tornado, it's like the classic Aero design, but it's using the newer technology, and it just shows you that had they been able to keep up with the technology and been just a couple more years ahead of the game, I think they really could have stuck around and could have still been a player today. When you look at the 70s and 80s, when Aero was building all these fantastic rides and all these huge record breakers, there wasn't a whole lot out there that was really pushing them and competing with them. When you get into the 90s, you're looking at rides like B&M became big in the 90s. You had Intamin make a push towards the late 90s. They became a big company. Premier Rides emerged in the mid 90s with their launch coasters, and Premier has arguably become the top company that builds the launch coasters now. You have RMC now, which is, I think, if you were to have any ties to go back to Aero, RMC might have the most amount of significant ties back to Aero aside from S&S, maybe, just because of S&S was who eventually acquired the assets. But I think with Schilke and they're out there in that general part of the country, I think S&S or RMC feels to me like there's just as much heritage there that ties back to Aero. So I really wish that maybe we would have been able to see Aero survive for a few more years, because I still think they could be doing good stuff. And I think that maybe we had, like, one of the interests, I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on this, the pipeline type of coaster, not the bobsled, but the pipeline coaster. Yeah. That is a type of coaster that's in Roller Coaster Tycoon 3, and I always like playing around with that, and I see pictures and video of the prototype that was there at the factory. Maybe, Robert, you can start here. What are your thoughts when you see that and just how weird that ride looks? It reminds me of the Heartline coaster that Togo does.
First thoughts is, what the hell were they thinking? This looks ridiculous. But yeah, it was just one of those things that didn't work out for them, unfortunately. But I really don't know what to say about it. It was definitely very unique, and no one probably. I really don't know. It's just one of those things.
Well, and it reminds me of, like, some of the elements you see with the wing coaster now, like the wing over drop. Like, that's the kind of thing that they tried to do with that. At least at their prototype, you have that little half barrel roll into a dive loop. So for me, I think of the wing coaster when I see that prototype, because it does some of the same maneuvers.
But again, it's just them trying to innovate, trying to find a way to do something that nobody else had ever thought of, and Lord knows nobody had thought of it. Nobody's thought of it since, but at least they were trying to do that. Same thing with trying to bring back the Virginia Reel. If you look at that footage carefully and then compare it to, well, that's a spinning wild mouse. That's exactly what that is. So a spinning wild mouse, that heritage goes back to the Virginia Reels of the 1900s.
Of course.
Now you've played this documentary at different events. I thought you played it at No Coaster Con up here in Chicago. Possibly? No, you didn't? I wasn't there.
Did we? No, I don't think we...
No? But you played it.
I don't think we had it.
We played at the Ace Dollywood event. That was at the Dreammark.
That was it. That's what I mean.
And then at Winter, was it Winter Warm Up as well? And Hershey Park.
Okay.
And then also at Six Flags Magic Mountain.
Oh, okay.
What has been the general response? Obviously, enthusiasts are going to love this. But what has been? Have you heard any personal stories from people that come up to you and say, "Wow, what has been the response to this documentary?"
Well, the first night that we had the premiere on January 23rd at the Montgomery Theater in downtown San Jose, we had Aero employees showing up that we didn't know were going to show up. We knew David Morgan and his family were going to be there. We knew that the Frank family would be there, but we had no idea that there would be tens of employees. I mean, we had a group photo of like 15, 20 former Aero employees. It was like a little mini reunion. And Kim Nix, who is one of the editors on the film, really helped us out there towards the end on the documentary. she says her favorite story about that is that when they came together and they told us all, you got it right. That to us was the coolest thing, to be able to say that we got the story right and it was good.
Yeah.
So that to us has been, I think, the coolest thing. At Magic Mountain, we had, I can't remember his last name all of a sudden, and I can't believe who did it. Michael Goff, who is a voiceover artist. You might know him if you do some video games work. Mm-hmm. And also, he happens to be the voice of one of the characters in the Winnie the Pooh ride in Disneyland. Well, get this. His dad was one of the 4 founding members of Arrow. So he kind of went full circle. And we had him at the Magic Mountain premiere. It's just so cool to be able to see that.
Yeah, that's,
And you want to do justice by them, too.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of pressure. There was a lot of pressure to make sure we got it right.
Because it just seems everyone I talk to has picked up on one story or one piece of the story and has had a really close emotional connection to that. I know, Danny, your aunt was like talking on Facebook the night that it premiered about the Loch Ness story, and it just seems like
absolutely.
everyone connects differently, and it just seems like it like you said, you got it right, and I think that's probably the most rewarding part of the whole process is getting it right. I know Devin Olson is our good friend, and we talk to him all the time about his documentaries, and through his process, it's telling those stories of the people. That's the thing. The coasters, the rides, they're great. That's what's going to bring people to the documentary. But it's the personal stories within that documentary that are the most rewarding to listen to. Like I said, the 2 marketing ladies that got stuck on the bobsled. It's those types of things that really really make these stories special and really make these documentaries worthwhile to watch. So having said that, and having said that, you said that you enjoyed the experience. Are there any other documentaries possibly down the road for you?
I was waiting for that one.
Wow, it's not surprising. That's the one question we always get, right?
Uh-huh.
Sure.
Well, okay, so the question is, are there any other plans for projects in the future?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I knew that was coming. He answered your question.
He did.
I did answer the question.
He did.
No, we've got a lot of great ideas coming down the pipeline. That's Coaster Fun, and I meant that on purpose. But we don't have anything in cement just yet. There's been an overwhelming response to this documentary. Like you said, the coaster videos are great and all, but videos like Devin's and apparently now videos like ours, they connect you on a different level. There's the coaster side, but then there's that human connection. And no matter what people might think about Arrow, the company, there were people behind that company. And, a person forged those tracks. They created that. That's human ingenuity. And I think that's the coolest connection that you can have. So to go back to my politician stance for a second there, yes, we have plans for additional documentaries. We love the work of Devin Olson. In fact, Devin was one of the biggest inspirations for us on this whole project, to know that there were other people out there who were ready to raise the bar on the standard, coaster video.
Yeah. And I've talked to him, and that's always been his thing too, is he wants more stories. That he always likes to tell the story how he would watch the top 5 shows on the Travel Channel. He's like, no, this is not what I want. I want something. I want something concrete. I don't want.
You know what? See, I have to chime in. I have to chime in here, and Andy knows exactly why I have to chime in here, because for the 2nd season of Insane Coaster Wars, I went to Canada's Wonderland because I was up in that area for college in Western New York, and I went up to ride Behemoth and Leviathan as an extra for some of their off-ride shoots. And I watched things like that because we've seen video, shows like that on Travel Channel and Discovery Channel forever. And sometimes it's up to date, like the Insane Coaster Wars was, and sometimes it's like, well, it's 2012 and I'm seeing Hypersonic XLC. I mean, that was gone 5 years ago, or whatever it was. But those shows are nice, and they're fun to watch to a certain extent because you get to see the rides. And when we're in the doldrums of winter in December and January here on the East Coast, or, where Andy is there in Chicago, it's nice to watch something related to roller coasters, but you watch it and you forget about it. And so those types of shows are nice. And then Andy, that I was the Dorney Park fanatic on the All-American Amusement Park show that came to Great American Country a little over a year ago now. And I like that a little bit more because they took someone who was from that area and had some sort of personal connection to the park. I worked at that park, and they asked for some of my stories along the way, and that was nice too. But when we see documentaries like Devon's has always talked, I want to hear the story about the people, and the ride is the reason that they're all in the same place. And this Legacy of Aero documentary has taken that to another level and said, here is the 50-year story of these people and what they created, and this is why the industry is what it is today. And it's like I said, it's one thing to look at the rides and say, this is a great ride because people like this ride because, and that's great. But when you have a personal connection to these stories, like my grandfather took my mom and her two sisters when they were kids to ride Loch Ness Monster. That's a personal connection I have there. And you see how many people have the connection to Disneyland. And like we said, a lot of aero coasters were people's first big roller coasters. You have so many people that can make those types of connections. And that's why these type of documentaries are special on a different level because of that. And I really do have to say, you guys did a really nice job conveying that and making this not just the facts, but making it the facts and then putting those personal stories in there that people can relate to. And everyone, I think, can pick something out of this documentary and say, well, this makes a personal connection to me because I rode this ride when I was a kid, or, I have a family member who ran that ride or helped build that ride, or I know someone who worked for Aero. And it's those connections that make it really special.
And we've got a lot of experience with that with our Lost Parks TV series that we have here in the Bay Area, where we can, part of it was finding people who actually went to some of these old parks. And that sort of led us to down that road, so to speak, to eventually tell the story of Aero. And only when we thought that we were ready and prepared to actually do it, because it was, it's quite a task to be able to put all of this stuff together to get the film out there. You're seeing only, two people right now, Robert and myself.
Mm-hmm.
We've got Nicholas Laskowicz, the video promotions coordinator for ACE, who's helping us out. Kimberly Nix, who, again, like I said, helped us out immensely towards the end there with the editing and helping Nicholas bring everything together. And then don't even get me started. The credit roll is about 2.5 minutes long. Well, that's because of all those people and all those parts that came in to help us. So, like what I was trying to say, that you might be seeing us right now, but there are literally hundreds of people who came together to make this film.
How long did it take you to make this film? Like when did you actually start the whole process?
We had a dinner at the Habit Grill in Santa Clara in October of 2014.
Okay.
That is when we decided we're going to do this, and that's when we started to reach out to parks.
Oh, that's awesome.
So nearly 2 years.
That's coincidentally when we started too.
That's incredible.
It really is. And I think to wrap this up here today, just to put an exclamation point on it, it's such a fantastic documentary. If you haven't watched it yet, you should really go out and watch this. Even if by some chance, some obscene chance that you've never ridden an Aero roller coaster, this is still a documentary that I think you're going to want to go watch.
This is one to watch.
Robert, any final thoughts and any things that you want to add to the story here this afternoon?
Well, yeah, I'd just like to share where everyone can find the documentary at. You can just go on to www.legacyofarrow.com,
Okay.
and it's right there in front of you. And then also, if you use hashtag Legacy of Arrow on Instagram, all the photos show up. We have an Instagram feed, and they all show up on our website.
Oh, okay.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thanks. I did not know there was a website. I just found it on YouTube. So that's awesome to know. So I'll be checking that out as well.
Oh, yeah, I'm gonna.
So you can,
I'm gonna
so
type
not
it in
only
as
can you
soon.
just do it, not just on the legacyofarrow.com, if you go and subscribe to Ace's YouTube channel, that's where you also get to see not only the film, but you'll also be the first to get that bonus content, because there's bonus content coming from the documentary.
Okay.
There are
Good to know that
several
either.
interviews that we have not even released. We couldn't fit it in the film because we thought it would go too long. There are some people that you don't even see here in the film. And they have just as good stories, but we had to, Sophie's choice, figure out which one we had to cut.
Absolutely.
So there's going to be a whole lot of bonus footage coming out. So subscribe to Ace's YouTube channel. You'll see other stuff from us, the Lost Park series, etc., coming down that pipeline as well.
And we'll put all those links in the comment section right below here as well, so you don't have to go rewinding and figuring out where stuff is. We'll put all those links down there to make sure that people know where to go. But I would like to thank both of you for coming on here this afternoon. It was a lovely documentary to watch. It's been a great discussion. If you guys ever want to come on again, the door is always open. We love having guests on COASTER-net Uncut. So thank you, Robert and Kris, for joining us here today.
No problem, and hopefully next time we'll be able to bring Nicholas and Kim in, and they can join in all the fun and talk to Danny's dog.
Yeah, that would be great.
Usually it's my dog that's causing trouble, but I put him away for this.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, not much I can do.
Yeah.
Not much I can do. Oh, well.
Well, as always, thank you for joining us here on COASTER-net Uncut. I am, of course, Andrew Barczyk from Chicago, Illinois.
And I'm Danny Miller from Allentown, Pennsylvania.
And as always, Ride On, Ride Warriors. Oh, you guys should introduce yourselves as well.
Come on, Andy.
I am Kris Robert from Redwood City, California.
And I am Robert Engel from San Jose, California.
As always, Ride On, Ride Warriors.
Thanks for joining us, guys. See you next time.